Hello everyone and welcome. Today we are going to make a whole bunch of cards using the Pink and Main card kit of the month from March 2023. I bought this myself. It was $34.99. It looked like a pretty good deal. So I thought let's try it out and see how it goes. Since I'm using the kit, I wanted to give you a quick overview of what's in there. It all comes in that box, so my cardstock doesn't get bent and mangled in the mail, which I really appreciate. There are 6 pieces of solid colored cardstock. It's at least 80 pound, but it doesn't actually tell me what weight it is. And then 2 pieces of 110 pound heavyweight white cardstock. The rest of my goodies came in this lovely zipper bag, but I already took them out, so I don't look like a fool trying to show you everything else. It has a little card that tells you what all is in there. Some of these are exclusive to the kit, but some of them you can buy separately, and I will link everything that is available below. This is a gorgeous set of sequins. I love these. I want to make a shaker of some kind. I want to use some as accents. These are sticker embellishments. I think these are available on their own. There are 2 in each color of the really big ones, and then 6 each of the medium and the small. There is a 24-page pack of patterned paper. I really like the Pink and Main patterned paper. It's not glossy, but it's almost like there's a little coating on it, like a matte glossy, like a matte photo finish almost. And I don't know, it just feels a little extra. So I'm going to flip real quick through this. The back always has a more neutral pattern, which makes them great for layering or using a couple on a card. And then here I'm kind of getting to the middle and it starts over. There is a pack of bonus foilables. Pink and Main just came out with their own line of foilables, and they have a pink mini mink coming out. I already have a mini mink and we'll use mine today. These are all the same pattern. There's 8 of them and they are 4 by 5 1/4. That is just going to shine like crazy. Let's try that. There is a full stamp set. This is big. This is, I don't know, 7 by 7 maybe. Let's see. 6.5 by 6.5, maybe 6 by 6 by the time you take it out of the package. And it's got an entire set of coordinating dies. There's no coloring required. So like on this birthday cake, you have this piece, but then here's the rest of the cake. Here's the plate, the candles, the flames for the candles. You could color if you wanted, but you don't have to. And I really kind of love that. I think this is exclusive to the kit. I have not seen it available otherwise. This is the fireworks embossing folder, which is 6 by 6 and awesome. And then this stencil is like 6 1/4 by 8.5 and huge and pretty awesome. Let's make some cards. I was so excited about this kit, and when it showed up in the mail, I got it up to my craft room and I was kind of stumped. Does this happen to you? You ordered it, it shows up, and then you don't know where to start. And I went looking for inspiration online, but because it's a monthly kit and it was pretty new, I didn't find a whole lot. So really, that's why I decided to film my process and maybe help other people out. I decided to start by just stamping some of these images. So I'm doing 2 of each. I always do this when there's like little pieces to fit into a stamp set in case I muck something up or in case I want to change up the colors. So I stamped this first present in pink, and then I did one of the bows in purple, and I was like, that's a big contrast. So I did the second one in this light pink. And then I'm going to go back in with a slightly darker pink, and I am just tapping some into the middle with a little blending brush to see what happens. And it gives just a little bit of dimension to that bow. And I like how that turned out. In the end, I'm stamping 6 images, 2 each of 3 different images, and we're going to use all of them on the cards today. And it just saved a lot of time to kind of do them all at the beginning. I saw Simon Hurley do this in one of his videos the other day. He used a background stamp and used Lunar paste to stamp a background. So I was like, well, let's see what happens if we add some silver accent. This is silver lining Lunar paste onto these cards. He made it look super easy. This actually took me lots and lots of layers to get this thick enough that you could see it. But I really like how it turned out. I will say it doesn't give a super crisp image, right? So this worked better, I think, like on the present than it does on some of our other images. Like on the cupcake, I'm going to use it for like a foil wrapper around it. It looks great, but you could get maybe a crisper, similar look using embossing powder. Okay, so I'm stamping in the sprinkles in purple, and then we're going to wait. We'll do the silver foil for the wrapper, and then the hat, I am doing like a little pink in the frilly piece at the top. And then when I add the lunar paste, I am putting just the tiniest little bit on my sponge, just a little, okay? And then I will stamp it a bunch of times to try to layer that up. So as I'm tapping onto my paper, if I see peaks coming up of lunar paste, I have too much. I also had to grab some new lunar paste. I couldn't just use what I had used on the present. It dries really fast. Like I just set these aside, cleaned up the lunar paste, and by the time I had done that, these were dry and I could run them through my die cut machine. So I am just taping each of those down with some low tack tape, and it cuts just the thinnest little border around them, which I really like. This is the blue cardstock that came in the kit, and I am just using that to create a matte layer on my A2 card. And then this piece of pattern paper, I'm cutting at 1.5 inches by 5.25 inches. And then I'm going to take this other piece and we're going to cut it at 2.5 by 5.25. So we're going to create not quite a scene, but in my head, it's like those streamers are coming down from the ceiling, and then we have something else happening on the bottom. I just thought that pattern was super fun. I'm going to layer both of those onto my card. I'll put them right up against each other, and that will give me a nice little mat all the way around the 4 sides. And then I'm going to take a little sliver, like a 1/2 inch of that same blue cardstock, and I'm going to run it across the middle. When I get stumped, and I was a little stumped, right? I had this kit, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it. I go to Pinterest, and a lot of times what I'm seeing are cards where I don't have that stamp set, I don't have that die set, I'm not going to order that, but I'm looking for layouts, like how have people used images of similar sizes? And so the card I was kind of looking at had 3 little circle images in a row on the right like that. But as I'm laying my pieces out, that doesn't fit. And so instead I ended up with 2 on each side. And then I am going to stamp this happy birthday on the white cardstock from the kit in some black VersaFine Onyx Clair ink. I am heat embossing it, but only because I am way too impatient to let it dry. And if I have to heat set it anyway to get it to dry faster, I might as well throw some embossing powder on it. I adore this ink. It is a crisp, dark black image, and that just looks really, really gorgeous. I set it on the card and I felt like it was getting a little bit lost. So I'm going to try a couple of things. You know, I love my circle punches. So this was the 2-inch circle punch. I didn't love that. So instead, I'm just using some temporary tape for now, and I'm going to tack that onto, this is more cardstock from the kit, and I am going to fussy cut around it. The die does a beautiful like bubble cut, right? So it's coming in a little bit around those. And so I didn't feel like I needed to mimic that on my matte layer, right? It was actually pretty easy and quick. And I'm going to pop all of those up on some thin foam squares from Spellbinders. Then I'm going to add 18.5 million sequins. At first, I kind of left in all the gluing down and I was like, I don't know, maybe the sequins are too much, and let me know what you think below. That was my getting started card, right? It felt a little bit like a struggle to me. I'm happy with how it turned out, but now we're going to do some exciting things. This is the foilable panel, and I am using silver Deco foil, and I'm running it through my Mink machine on level 3. If you're new to a Mink machine, it's like a fancy laminator. You can pick the heat level. Of note, hotter does not mean a better foil. So this one, it turned out mostly good, right? There's a good chunk on the left They foiled beautifully. And then I've got some spots on the right where the foil didn't stick to everything, but that's okay. I wasn't planning on using the whole panel anyway. And then I am using my fresh dye inks from Altenew here to do some blending. This foilable panel is a pretty slick white cardstock. The ink dried okay on it. I was worried about that. But because it's slick, it meant the blending was so easy. And these inks, this is the sort of reformulated Altenew inks. I have just one set in these purples that I thought were super pretty. And they blend really well. I really, really like that. They are going to dry back just a little bit. I'm going to keep using these purple inks in my craft room, and I will let you know when I have like a more complete, not maybe a review of them, but I like them a lot. I am cutting this down, and then the matte layer is just very slightly bigger than that. I'm leaving that 1/8 of an inch border all the way around. So the panel is 2.5 by 5 1/4. So then the mat is 2 3/4 by 5 1/2. So I'm going to stick that on the left. And actually there's sort of happy birthdays going every which way. But I felt like more of the images were upright this direction. So I was kind of paying attention to that. And then we're going to grab another one of the happy birthday sentiments. There are 3 separate happy birthdays and then a die that cuts out celebrate. We're going to use, I was sort of shocked when I was finished with everything. I used almost everything in this kit, right? And there's still so much I could do. This was, I have to say, an incredible value. Kits are sort of new to me. They aren't something I've tried a lot of, but a lot of kits out there, like I've done some from Spellbinders and I've done some from Stampin' Up! And Hero Arts. A lot of kits out there are around the same price point, but I've never gotten one that has this much stuff in it. And most of it is reusable, right? The cardstock, obviously, and the sequins, you're going to use them and then they're gone. But the stamp set, I mean, anyway, I'm gushing. It's fine. So I heat embossed this happy birthday, and then I just trimmed it to make sure it was sort of even on the top and bottom. And then I cut like an angle on that white one, and I lined it up on my purple piece just to make sure I got the same angle, but then I'm going to pull it back so I can keep that same margin on that angled cut as I have on the top and bottom. I'm going to lay that down on my card kind of where I think it fits best, and then I will just trim the excess off the side. This is a pretty simple card, but you know, it works for me. I really wanted to let that foiling take center stage. So I'm gonna sort of trim that off, and then I'll add a couple of the sticker pieces. These, I like the really small ones. And a lot of times I end up with packs of embellishments like this, and they give you the same number of the really big ones as they do of the other sizes, and I'll use up all of the smalls and mediums, and then those big ones are just like hanging out there daring me to use them. So I like that this doesn't have a ton of those really big ones. I'm going to add 3 of the pink just for a little bit of contrast, a pop of a different color, and that will finish up card number 2 for us. For card number 3, we are going to do some embossing. This embossing folder, it's a 2D embossing folder. It's pretty big, but it's just got this center burst. So I lined it up in the grid on my mat, and that helps me to make sure that I have centered that firework burst pattern. I put it all the way at the bottom. I want the burst slightly towards the top, and then I'm just going to use a circle die and cut out the center of it. We're going to make a shaker. I needed to emboss it so I knew where to cut the circle, but now I'm going to stick it back in the embossing folder and run it through one more time because I flattened out a lot of that embossing when I cut the circle out. Here I'm coming in with some Wisteria ink from Altenew, and I am just starting on the inside of the circle, and I'm trying to go very delicately outward. I am not a delicate blender. It's just not a thing that I have in my arsenal. So that's part of why I really like these Altenew inks. They smooth out on their own and often can help with that. Then I came in with a little bit of hydrangea, which is a shade or two darker, just to get the very inside of that circle. I wanted to add just a little bit of extra interest on this panel. Now I'm going to cut it down just a little bit so I can have a matte layer. I took a 1/4 inch off the top and then 1/8 of an inch off of each side, and you can see on this sort of teal piece that came from the kit that'll leave me an equal margin on all 4 sides. I drew a circle in pencil just to make sure I knew where on the teal that circle was going to be, and then I'm going to cut that out with a slightly larger circle. That way I don't have to get this lined up perfectly for everything to fit. I am taking some Shimmer Spritz from Echo, and I am going to add that to this purple panel. It's really hard to capture on film. If you haven't tried it before, I'm telling you, I put that on everything. It doesn't change the color of anything. It's not super in your face. It's just a little bit of shimmer. Okay. So this is my card base, and I have again drawn a light circle just so I know where to go. And then this is Twilight ink from Versamark. And I'm going to stamp that and then heat emboss it. This is going to be the center of our shaker. Okay. So again, this is just me being too lazy to let it dry. Would you guys rather heat emboss it or wait for it to dry? I don't know. I hemmed and hawed about this one because I didn't want to warp my card base. It did very slightly, but we're going to put a bunch of foam tape on it. It'll be fine. I'm going to erase that circle, and now we're going to start building our shaker. This teal piece I'm going to glue directly onto the card base. All right, so it's going to go flat on there, and once it's down, I'm going to start double checking everything and just building everything up. You can see, you guys, I'm still struggling with card making. I think this was maybe the most complicated way to add some double-sided tape to the back of my panel I could have come up with. It worked. It's fine. I put a little bit of acetate, some recycled packaging on it. And then I am grabbing my foam tape. This is 2mm foam tape, and I'm just going to do a single layer. I don't like a ton of bulk in my cards. And so to get it to go around that circle, I'm making sure everything touches so that it's not gonna leak sequins. But I took the backing off of both sides, and then you can get it to turn like that. So then I'm standing up, I'm like crossing my fingers, I'm praying that I put this on straight, and it works. And it still shakes, there's good movement, and it's not super bulky. I love this sequin mix. This might be my favorite card. I don't know. It's hard to pick, but this might be it. Then I grabbed the present that we made earlier, and I'm going to tuck that in the corner, and it didn't quite seem finished. So this was the circle we cut out of that piece of teal in the background, and then I'm adding the die from the circle we cut out of the purple layer, and I will create this teeny tiny little frame. I think it pulls the whole thing together, and it really draws your eye towards our little shaker, our focal piece with the It's Your Birthday. Also, I have to tell you, I showed this card to my son, and he started singing the It's Your Birthday song from Thor Ragnarok. It might be the whole family's favorite movie. I lost it. I just died a little. So that finishes up this card, and you guys, I love a good shaker, and this one, I thought it turned out really well. For this next card, we are going to use the Giant Stars stencil. I am just using some low tack tape and taping it onto a large panel. It's 8.5 by maybe 6.25, 6 inches. And we're going to add some Duo gel. This is made by the people who make Deco foil, and I am adding just a real thin layer all over this panel. Because it's so big, I have a stencil pal, like a large scraper tool. I could not find it. That would have worked really, really well. Instead, I'm just doing my best. You could use an old credit card, a hotel room key, and I am going to peel that off. This will dry and be slightly tacky, just slightly. I left mine overnight. It doesn't take that long, but I have kids, so they take that long. And I'm just making sure it covers the whole panel. So I'm trying to use some scraps. The first piece doesn't really fit, but I'm going to add a second piece just to cover up the part that's sticking out, and that will work just fine. You will never be able to tell, okay? And it helps that the gel is slightly grabbing that foil. I ran it through my Gemini Junior. You can either use a laminator or you can use a die cutting machine. The first time I just used my regular sandwich and it didn't foil all the way. And so I stuck a metal shim in there, ran it through again, and it foiled beautifully. There are just a few places where it didn't stick because the gel was too thin. So I came in, this is the Deco Foil Adhesive Pen. And I just filled it in. I gave it like 5 minutes to dry, and then I'm just pressing firmly with some foil to fill in some of those gaps, and it worked pretty well. So now I have this huge panel. I'm going to end up with a bunch of extra pieces of this panel that I have saved for other cards, but I started by creating just an A2 panel. So remember, this was wider than 5.5 inches. It was more like 6 inches. Part of that stencil, it has a place to put it in a binder, and so it foiled that too. So I wanted to make sure I was cutting that piece off. And then once I get it down to A2 size, I cut it at an angle. I didn't measure it. I just cut it. I'm coming in with some pink inks from Altenew. I'll link the inks below. And then this taffy, the first ink wasn't quite dark enough, but the taffy from Simon Says Stamp this is a powerhouse ink. You have to be real careful with this one. So I'm checking, I'm double checking, I'm tapping it off. And I'm going to go around those 3 sides. It will not stick to the foil. It will never dry on the foil. So I'm coming in with a dry cloth and I'm just buffing that away, and it comes off super easily. And then that is my panel. It has just a little bit of darkness around the sides. This is some glossy black cardstock from Simon, and I cut out the Celebrate. There's the word Celebrate. There's also a shadow die for that. And I cut that out, and then I sprayed this the back of the card, right? This is my A2 card, again with that Deco Shimmer Spritz. And I'm going to go ahead and add my star panel on the bottom. I'll be honest, when I had it in my trimmer, I thought I was cutting the angle going the other way. My plan originally was to have the Celebrate right along that angle going up, and somehow in my head it looked weird going down. So we're coming up with plan B. I cut a tiny little sliver of that same glossy black cardstock, and then I just used a black Sharpie to run it along the edge. The back of the cardstock is white, and I didn't want that to show. I don't know if anybody but me would notice, but I did it anyway. And then I'm going to trim off the sides so I didn't have to measure that perfectly. And then now I'm trying to figure out how to get the Celebrate on there straight. If I had used the shadow die and cut the Celebrate out of the middle of the shadow die, this would have been super easy, but it didn't occur to me at the time. So I cut a strip it's maybe 3/8 of an inch, and I'm using temporary tape, and I put that along the top, and then I cut along the top of the Celebrate, just barely removing it to make sure that the top of that was straight. And I will add my letters right into the negative space on there. It was pretty quick, definitely easier than if I had been cutting this with just an alpha set, because at least it has all the spacing for me for the letters, and then that means I can use my glue to add it directly to the card base instead of trying to put glue onto the backs of each of those tiny little letters. That would have been a lot more work. So I am bringing back the other 3 images that we stamped at the very beginning before we started card 1, and I'm going to cut those out. And then I am adding the cupcake onto a 1.5 inch circle that I punched out of that same glossy black cardstock. And then I'm adding some of my smallest blue gem stickers. There's like a little bit of glitter in there, and I felt like that blue matched my ink beautifully. And then I am just going to create a little row of 3. I actually hadn't stuck the cupcake down yet. I wanted to make sure that it was going to be centered in the middle of all that. So I'm going to pop it up slightly on some thin foam squares, and that will finish off card number 4. I love the shine on this one. It's a pretty simple layout, but it still feels really special, I think. For our last card, I'm coming in with a piece of pattern paper. This purple, something about this purple, and it's just got a little bit of that geometric pattern. And then this piece of cardstock is 3 inches by 4¼ inches, and I'm going to stamp a background onto this paper using a very, very pale ink. This is soft lilac from Altenew. It's almost gray, but not quite. I'm actually coming in, I stamped each of them twice. Through the magic of editing, you didn't have to watch all of that. But I'm kind of moving some stamps around, and then I'm coming in with the candles as well, and I'll add some candles and flames just to fill in the background a little bit. And then I am going to add a little strip of that teal cardstock, and then I have some matte silver. This was just a tiny little strip that was in my scraps bin, and I'll add that as an accent. I felt like that matte silver went really, really well with the silver Lunar paste. They've got about the same sheen to them. So this is going to go kind of at the top of my card. And I know I want a sentiment. I want to use the one I haven't used yet. And I'm stamping Happy Birthday. I'm going to stamp it a couple of times. This is Unicorn White Pigment ink from Hero Arts, and I'm going to use some silver embossing powder. This is old embossing powder from Stampin' Up. I don't know if they still carry it. Probably they do. It's just silver. If I'm stamping onto black, I always powder it up like crazy. And then I like to use white ink instead of Versamark, and in case there's any places where the ink doesn't stick or the powder doesn't stick, right, it just fills in some of those gaps. And then to remove that powder, I use an eraser. I find that works a little bit better for me than my cloth. Also, my cloth is usually messy, and I end up with something on there I didn't want on there. This die cuts so close to the letters, which I love, but I found it was kind of tricky to try to line it up. So I cut it out of a Post-it note and lined that up so I could see exactly where my die was going to cut. And then I put the die on top of the Post-it, and it just sort of like wiggles in and pops in perfectly. You get a perfect cut the first time. I wasn't sure where to add these. I wiggled them around. I tried a bunch of different stuff, but in the end, I actually ended up adding the present and the hat right over top of where I had stamped them towards the bottom. And I like that they overhang that panel, right? Like, it's so exciting. It's bursting off the panel. And then I stacked up 2 more layers. So there's 3 total of the Happy Birthday from the die. Obviously, I didn't have to stamp the ones that went behind it, but there are some delicate little pieces. I felt like this worked better than trying to put a bunch of little foam squares behind it. And I'm going to stick that kind of towards the top. And then we're going to add just a few more of those sequins. These sort of shift color in the light, like towards the bottom. The small one towards the bottom almost looks orange, but in person it doesn't. They're all sort of pinks and purples. And that will finish up card number 5. So that's 5 cards from one kit. I had a lot of fun with this one. If you watched this far, this is the longest video I've ever made. Thank you so much for joining me. Give this a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and I will see you next time.